Very well said. I'd like to introduce Greg Peachey. As many of you will know, he's the founder and chair of FREdome Visionary Trust. I'd like him to just outline the theme of today's meeting, please.
First, I'd like to say, well, thanks ever so much to everyone for coming along. You're all very welcome indeed. Now, I doubt that many of us have come as far as Dr. Newton Gibonneau. He's travelled all the way from Africa to be here today, so an extra special welcome to you, Doctor. Now, what I want to do today then is put a proposal before you today, and I want to demonstrate that it can actually resolve many urgent problems. It can deliver huge potential benefits, and I'd also you can see that it's very, very plausible indeed. You come to that crunch point. See, it's just possible that we're at that crunch point now. See, just suppose that some commodities are starting to become scarce, then what sort of symptoms would you expect to see? Price rising, I'd say. So the question is, as you go about your daily life, which commodities do you see consistently rising in price? What are the key ones? Petrol, fuel, food, yeah. Food and fuel, those are the two things that are going up in price, aren't they? Now, next question is, when we consume food and fuel, what do they become? What material things do they become? Waste, certainly food becomes waste. And carbon dioxide, carbon emissions, that's right. They become carbon emissions and waste. So do you agree that if we could only start converting carbon emissions and waste back into food and fuel, then we've got a cyclic, sustainable economy? So next question is, what process is it that turns carbon emissions and waste back into food and fuel? Plants. Absolutely, it's photosynthesis. It's what trees and crops do. Yes? You remember, we take a bit of CO2 and some sunlight and some water and a bit of muck, yeah? And you can grow food and energy crops. And we all learn that at school, but the problem is, you see, is that link hasn't been generally made. And so here's the real root of the problem. The problem is that there isn't enough arable land left in the world to do photosynthesis on a sufficient scale to take our carbon emissions and our waste, which are now building up, and convert them back into food and fuel, which are now becoming in increasingly short supply. And one of the principal reasons for that is that when we first explored those great land masses, the first thing that we did, quite understandably, was to clear the coastal trees. The problem is, you see, that rainforest, if you think about it, can only be rainforest if it's connected to a source of airborne moisture which comes from over the sea. Right? So as soon as you remove those coastal trees, then it's game over. The whole continent will progressively turn into desert. So the solution then is to put the coastal trees back, which is not easy because the desert climate, of course, is very harsh. But Andrew Fletcher, who I hope is sitting somewhere here, he's standing over there, he's an engineer, and he has pointed out, you see, that the oil supertankers, they all tend to come from the desert regions, and then we send them back full of seawater as ballast. But meanwhile, we're still outfall piping our wastewater and sometimes even raw sewage off our coasts, and then it comes back to haunt our beaches. So he says, so if instead of sending seawater back, if they were filled with our wastewater, then at the other end, you suddenly got all the organic material and the nutrients that you need to turn sand back into soil, and you've got millions of tons of water with which to irrigate your coastal tree belts, and they will then induce a moist microclimate, enabling agroforestry to proceed back inland, taking all that excess CO2 out of the air and growing the food and the energy crops that the world needs. He also points out that if we can use coastal vegetation to seed these great circulating air currents with moisture, then we can actually send rainfall to the far side of the desert, where and even arrest desertification or even reverse it. Desertification that causes communities such as Dr. Gibonneau's people, they're forced to abandon their own land and invade their neighbour's territory. So, where would we get all the money and the effort to make this happen? Always a perennial question. Now, if you think about it, while we have a system which is in decline, the consumer debt system is in decline, so what we could do, see, is take the redundant resources, the resources become redundant, and use those to build the new sustainable system. And do you agree that as the old consume and dump economy starts to shrink, then inevitably some people will lose their jobs, won't they? Some people will lose their businesses. So our proposal then is to support unemployed people to construct applications for relevant international funding, and that is still out there, and to create a new industry which would convert carbon emissions and waste cyclically into food and fuel. And the result of that would then be foreign investment coming into the country. We could put the UK back on the world stage as a leader and a shareholder in a new industry that, as it grows, would actually restore the world's environment and its resource base instead of polluting and plundering the planet. And then we could usher in the age of global restoration that Tara spoke about, and it would give that a much needed boost to confidence. You see, and I believe that that's the sort of message that should be coming from our government and from the media. So, okay, lots of benefits there, powerful solutions. How believable is this? Well, I would ask you to judge it from the calibre of the sorts of people who are taking this very seriously. So, for example, Professor Michael Braungart has given us a public endorsement of our project manifesto. He's the co-founder of the European C2C movement, and I will send everyone a link to that, and then you can see who he is and what he has to say. In 2010, we convened a meeting here about, in this very group, about the project, and we invited a very diverse audience, including scientists at the top of the relevant fields, and they agreed to become our scientific and technical advisory board. And Liverpool John Moores University, who is represented today by Dr. David Wilkinson, who's sitting here in the front, they led our first funding application to Europe, and that application, which included, we had a number of partners, but both in the UK and in Spain, and between them they pledged €500,000 if that can be matched by Europe. And yes, we had partners in the UK and in Spain, and in fact our Spanish partners are arranged along the Andalusian coast, where the Sahara Desert is now beginning to cross over from Africa into Europe. And the bid includes doing things like communicating this concept to European policymakers, public and private sector, and inspiring community members to go out walking in forests and to pick up acorns, nuts and other tree seeds, and to nurture those saplings in plastic bags in their garden, ready to be transplanted as permitted by authorities under the direction of scientists. And in Spain, what we'd like to do with those saplings is to use them to conserve coastal forests by increasing their biodiversity. And in the UK, our vision is to plant a line of trees from the East Anglian coast towards an inland reservoir in order, as a coastal defence, as East Anglia, as you said, there is falling into the sea at the moment, literally, to combat drought in the region and as proof of the project concept. And over there in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see footage that Andrew has shot on the south coast, and it clearly shows trees, a belt of trees, drawing in that moisture inland from the sea. Dr. David Wilkinson will also be sharing with us today his unique study into an experiment which was initiated by Darwin himself. And what happened there was that trees were placed with access to atmospheric moisture, and that caused an entire desert island to green itself exponentially, showing that this sort of thing really can be done. And then to promote viability of our project, as you know, you've already heard, we have partnered commercially with the CTP network, and they have sponsored this event today, and as we heard, they pledged to pay from every single call into the project. So in summary then, our proposal then is to support unemployed people to construct applications for international funding, to create a new industry, to start converting carbon emissions and waste decisively into food and fuel. See, and I know, let me just say that what I hope I've done is to demonstrate then that this approach could resolve many urgent problems. It could deliver potentially huge benefits, and I hope you've seen from the people who are taking this seriously that it is a perfectly plausible proposition. In fact, I would say that unless we start converting our outputs back into our inputs, then I really don't see that there's another sustainable solution. And I know that it's a very big project. This requires global collaboration, but maybe this is a good time to bring this up with the UN summit due in June. And the UN Secretary General said at the last Davos in 2011, he said he called for proposals that will actually connect the dots between climate, water, energy and food. See, and I believe that's exactly what you've done here. And we're lucky enough to have Jessica Scholl, who's over there with us today, with bad throat. Tell your throat, it's better now. But she's in a good position really to help us to identify the processes by which the UN can pick up on high impact proposals and then fast track their consideration. The UN Secretary General, I'm running out of, I think, some water in it, also pointed out that because of our pattern of consumption, that the nations of the world are in a global suicide pact, he says, and I think that's true, isn't it? But here you see we have an opportunity for international partnership. You see, and if we can help the emerging nations to green their arid land, then they can build their economies by absorbing our carbon emissions and then providing back to us renewable supplies of the very commodities that our communities and our industries are beginning to run short of. And that's brilliant, that's very welcome. And of course what that would do then is lead back to a thriving global economy, and of course a booming economy is always good for business, and in fact that's a good point at which to hand over to our speakers from the Centre for International Business and Sustainability at the London Metropolitan University, and they will be presenting to us a very relevant case study. So just say thank you ever so much for listening to me so far, and I will be back later. So thank you.